Turns out it was an adult python over 2 meters long, 6.5 feet. Each night it worked its way under a ceiling tile, and onto the bed. Serious, people of Reddit, what was the creepiest thing you experienced that you thought was paranormal, but was actually much scarier when you found out what really caused it? As a young kid, I had nightmares of waking up to see my mother hovering over my bed by the window. She just blankly stared down at me and my sister. I'd get so scared yelling "Mom! Mom!" And she never responded. It knew it was not my mom. When I was older I told my aunt about it and she told me they weren't dreams. It was real. My mom would go into our rooms randomly to check on us. She had serious mental health issues that got worse over the years. Occasionally she would have episodes of the anxiety of something happening to us and guard us at night. Due to the traumatic death of her first child, it apparently triggered obsessive anxiety when we were younger. I now know the whole fucked up backstory and can sympathize with why it would make any parent get to that mental state, but I still shudder when I think of the blank face stare. I still tend to associate the nightmare mom as not being my mom. Quite a bit different, but that fear reminded me of something that happened to me. I came home from work, opened the door and took my shoes off. My dad was standing maybe 10 or 12 feet away from the front entrance area in the middle of the hall. He was just staring at me. No emotion. No movement. No sounds. Just staring. Something felt off, so I called out to him. He didn't respond. So I kept calling out to him. At this point, in my head, I'm starting to come up with ways to kill him if I had to. This goes on for an uncomfortably long time. And I'm just standing there looking back at him. Then all of a sudden he busts out laughing. That shit was just screwing with me. I freaking hate my family sometimes. I was 24 and working at a startup.com. I spent a weekend at my parents' house, came back to my apartment and went into my bedroom where I saw my bed was made. Felt my heart stutter as I stood frozen in the doorway because I never ever made my bed. It was something I consciously refused to do. After the initial shock, I went through the apartment examining the closets, under the bed, etc. I calmed down after a while, convincing myself that I must have made the bed before I left for my parents and just forgotten about it. Deep down, I knew it wasn't true, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. I later found out it was the woman I was dating at the time who did it. She was the person who hired me. We'd been in a relationship less than a month, but she managed to somehow get a copy of my key. She used to visit my place and snoop through my things when I was gone. She also slept in my bed overnight several times when I was away for the weekend. If she hadn't made my bed, I never would have known anything was going on. About 7 years ago, my family rented a one-story house. It was originally one bigger house that was split off into two, and there was another family that lived in the other part that we didn't really talk with. During the night, I would hear what sounded like knocks above the ceiling, but any entrance to the small crawl space between the ceiling and the roof was patched up when the house was divided. For a while, I thought there was a ghost who lived in the attic, and I would have trouble going to sleep without a light on. After we moved out, I heard through the grapevine that the neighbor's kid was caught spying on the new people that moved in. Turns out that he had broken a hole in the ceiling of his closet to get into the crawl space and had been looking through holes that he had bored in the ceiling overlooking the other part of the house. The noises I heard were him moving around on his arms and knees up there. I had a blind dog growing up and she barked at things that were there, and things that weren't. One night, around midnight, she woke up my mom and me by barking at the wall next to the back door. I woke up, but I was maybe 9, so I went right back to sleep. My mom got up and ushered her back to bed. That same night, an arsonist hit my neighborhood. He set fire to a luckily vacant house for sale and it burned to the ground. Following his footsteps in the snow, he then passed between my bedroom and our garage and nearly lit our garage. Then our dog and my mom woke up, and we think that scared him away, and he went across the street and burned the neighbor's garage instead. Then he stood in their front yard and watched it burn. He walked out onto the street and they lost his footsteps. They never caught him. R.I.P. Oreo, I miss you. You were a very good pup. Love you, be good. This did not happen to me, but it happened in my city when I was in high school. A family thought that their house was haunted because things like furniture and objects would randomly move or go missing. This went on for several months. They even reached out to their pastor to bless the house. Well, the house wasn't haunted. It turned out that a drifter had wandered in at some point and had been living in their attic. He would come out when the family was at work and eat their food and go through their things for cash and stuff to sell. One day, one of the family members came home unexpectedly and caught them. Called police for an active break-in. The cops quickly discovered what had been going on. I didn't think this was paranormal but definitely thought it was creepy and ended up being more than I bargained for. When I was 13, I had a small jewelry box my mom gave me that had cushions for rings. I had 6 rings that I kept in it, nothing of value, think mood rings and silver rings. I was somewhat neurotic as a kid and had spent an afternoon arranging my room, and I'd put the 6 rings in a specific order. I opened the box one day and noticed that 2 of the rings were out of order. I thought someone in my family had moved them because there was zero explanation for this. I asked my family if anyone had touched them, and they all insisted no one had opened the box, but I was convinced someone had to have gone through it. My dad ended up going through our entire house checking for missing stuff, and the only missing things were an old bottle of hydrocodone from the medicine cabinet and some of my mom's gold jewelry from a bathroom drawer. Turns out there had been strings of robberies in the neighborhood where thieves had broken in but only taken prescription drugs and small gold items. None of the robberies had indications that the homes had been broken into, and things like laptops, diamond jewelry, and other valuables had been left alone. My family wouldn't have known anything was amiss aside from the fact I was so convinced something was off. When I was 8, we were on a long holiday, staying with some family in a town called subreddits in country Queensland, Australia. I was staying in their son's room who had moved to Brisbane for university. Each night I had the same recurring nightmare of an alien tentacle trying to grab me. After a week I was terrified of going to sleep, but my parents kept telling me that it was okay. I was just frightened because we were staying somewhere new and that it would be okay. Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept watching the clock, waiting for the sun to come up and terrified of the alien. It was just after 2 a.m. when a large tentacle landed on the bed. I screamed in terror as I felt the tentacle wriggling. I jumped out of bed and kept screaming. My parents, aunt, uncle, and sister run into the room, to find me huddled in the corner screaming. Turns out it was an adult carpet python over 2 meters long, 6.5 feet. Each night it worked its way under a ceiling tile, and onto the bed. I still have an Indiana Jones fear of snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes? I was 7 years old, home alone. My parents went for dinner at around 9 p.m. They left me in bed for me to sleep. Hours passed and still couldn't sleep. Went downstairs to get some milk and cookies to watch TV in my parents' bedroom. While I was getting my snacks, I felt like someone grabbed my shoulder hard. I was so scared I couldn't even turn around to check who did it. I stayed there, frozen, for at least 1 minute straight. I had the balls to run and went to my parents' bedroom. I locked myself in there and didn't get out until my parents came home. It was 3 a.m. and heard my parents' car park outside the window. I was never so happy for them to come home. As soon my parents get in the house, my own screamed and called 911. The thing I thought was a ghost that grabbed me was actually a drug addict who secretly lived in our basement, and that night he had thought nobody was home, so he went to grab some snacks from the fridge too and confused my shoulder with the fridge's door and then passed out. Still freaks me out to this day. Not sure if this really counts, but about 5 years ago I got a phone call from my brother and he just kept mumbling into the phone. He kept muttering random words, and because I was younger, stupid me thought he was possessed or something, but he had just had a seizure and had just woken up. My brother gets really woozy and panicky after he has a seizure. Scared the living hell out of me. A little after I graduated high school, some friends and I were hanging out at a local park after dark. I decided to go walk through the woods for the spookiness of it. About 20 minutes in, we hear this loud screaming from behind us and barely see this dark figure rushing towards us at what we would describe as supernatural speed, so we hauled ass and didn't stop until we were out of the wooded area and didn't see it. A couple of friends claimed it appeared to be floating towards us as it howled like a banshee. We later found out that the area of the woods is popular for homeless people to hang out in and shoot up. So instead of some sort of evil wood spirit, it was most likely a homeless heroin addict running at us at full speed and screaming. One late fall night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to drive out to this radio tower, just out of curiosity. It was in the middle of a large field with one entrance that happened to be open. We entered from there and drove about 1/4 mile in towards the radio tower. When we got there, we noticed, underneath the radio tower, a rusty beat-up car. The thing looked like it hadn't been driven in years. We pulled to the other side of the tower and just chilled for a little bit, talking about whatever and listening to music. Then one of my friends pointed towards the beat-up car. "Does it look like there's a light in there?" he said. We all stared at the car and sure enough, emanating behind the dust-covered windows of the car was a dim light. We pretty quickly put our car in drive and started moving out of there. It was a field though, so, of course, we moved relatively slow. The same friend who pointed out the light noticed that the car started moving along with us, following slowly. It didn't put on its headlights, but the light inside the car seemed to glow brighter. That was the moment that my friend driving screamed and hightailed it faster than I'd ever seen. We left the junk car in the dust, literally in this case, and from that day we had always referred to this story as the ghost car story. Did we really believe in ghosts? Probably not, but paranormal is better than whatever else it could have been. Come to find out, a few years later, that field was regularly being monitored by the local sheriff's office for big drug deals that apparently went down there. Had we stuck around any longer that night than we did, we could have legitimately been killed. This was also in the era that we watched a lot of Breaking Bad, so in retrospect, it seemed to us like that could have very much been a likely outcome from that night. Luckily we're all good and nothing bad ever came of it for any of us. What makes it scarier is that I still have no idea what happened. This is the only weird or paranormal thing that has ever happened to me. I was 11 and I recently moved to another city with my family due to my father being in my country's army. We were staying there for a year and thankfully the army gave us a decent house in a complex built for officials with families. Each house had its own large backyard and was separated from other houses by 12 feet concrete walls. One Sunday my family went to buy some stuff at the supermarket. My older sister went with them and my little one was still a baby, so I was gonna be alone for a couple of hours. I was okay just playing with my dog, but I remembered that I needed to get my black socks for my school's Monday uniform that resembled a suit and tie. I went to the backyard to get them since they were hanging to dry. At this point, I was getting bored of waiting for my socks and I say out loud, "I'm really bored," only to almost immediately hear a young voice closely say, "Then let's play." The voice was clear but not loud. It didn't feel like it came from in front of me or any of my sides, it was just there. I turned around to see my normally hyperactive golden retriever sitting quietly and staring at me. I look around very fast trying to find the source of the voice, but the house to the right was empty and separated by the concrete wall. The house to the left was over 50 feet away and behind the wall, and behind my house, there was the long wall with nothing but a steep hill and a house at the bottom behind it. I ran for dear life and hid in my parents' bedroom under the covers and turned the TV on at max volume until they arrived. I explained to them what happened and they had to calm me down for the rest of the day. I have no idea what was that, and to this day I still cannot put my finger on it. I knew the kids on the house to the left, and it wasn't any of their voices. The house to the right didn't have any kids, as I learned later, and there's no way some kid climbed a hill, then a 12-feet wall covered in sharp glass at the top just to say that. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.